My name is Ashley Weeks-Cart. I'm class of 2005, and I am one of the assistant directors in the Alumni Relations Office. I specifically oversee classes and reunions, so I have been working with all of your various class leaders and class volunteers to plan the festivities this weekend. So to kick things off, we have a wonderful panel with former President John Chandler, Bruce Grinnell, class of 1962, Dee Gardner, class of 1957, and Tony Smith, class of 1957, to talk about the rise and fall of fraternities at Williams. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing more of you this weekend.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Bruce Grinnell, and as Ashley said, I'm in the class of 1962. This afternoon, we thought we would begin with John Chandler, who is doing extensive research on the rise and fall of the fraternities at Williams. And I think that you will be wowed by the kinds of information that John has turned up about our past presidents at Williams and their reaction to fraternities here. It is something that, well, I certainly wasn't aware of it. I'm not sure John was aware of it before he began to do his research. The other panelists today are two members of the class of 1957. 57 marked an interesting point in the concern about the equity in fraternities and their viability at Williams. And a group came forward at that time that became named the Terrible 22. And we've got two of the 22 here today to talk about that particular period in the history of Williams. And I will address the issue that came up my junior year at Williams and resulted in the petition that was presented to Finney Baxter in May of 1961 on a Thursday, and returned on a Monday with a comment that I arrived with 15 fraternities, I'm leaving with 15 fraternities. So, John, would you kick this off for us?
Thank you, Bruce. Unlike my young colleague here and my former student, as a matter of fact, is there anybody here who did not take a course with me? And okay. Yeah, so some of you preceded me. I take it that my job is to take a kind of U-2 flight over the whole terrain. You're the generation that will understand what the U-2 flights were about. And so I'll begin with the coming of fraternities to Williams in 1833. KA came first from Union College, Sigma Phi, 1834, Union College. Union College was a seedbed for fraternities, and I'd say the big three fraternity institutions in this part of the world at the beginning, as a matter of fact in the U.S., at the beginning were Union, Williams, and Hamilton, all frontier colleges. It got sort of lonely being separated from your family, and so these friendship groups formed. And then DU came in 1834 with a kind of up and down history. At first, it was not a secret fraternity. It was transparent. As a matter of fact, the secrecy of fraternities was controversial from the very beginning. There was a lot of anti-Masonic sentiment, and the fraternities at the beginning were very much like the Masons' lodges, and they continued to be very much like the Masonic movement. And the early leaders of Williams, President Griffin, for whom this great hall is named, and then President Hopkins in particular, they were upset that so many Williams students joined the local Masonic lodge. It's not Christian. You're supposed to not have secrets. You confess your sins and shortcomings to your friends, and you get and give counsel and so forth. Now, fraternities were controversial from the very beginning because of secrecy, and but they were popular. They had appeal, and in a way that's in my manuscript, but it's complicated and too lengthy to present. The French Revolution was a big theme. The French Revolution was regarded by Thomas Jefferson and many others as an extension of the American Revolution, and there were themes in the French Revolution that were not present in our revolution. One was, we've got to break the authority of the church. And specifically, of course, that would have been the Roman Catholic Church. And the deists, who after all were really not Christians, although, you know, in the rhetoric of the election, you make it sound as though Jefferson and Madison, those people were in church every Sunday, which is not true. And furthermore, they were really not Christians in the sense that the term is defined today. But the French Revolution was very fashionable among college-age students, young people, French revolutionary thinking. And so that theme gets worked in there, and you find it particularly in the works of Albert Hopkins, the younger brother of Mark. Now, fraternities caught on very rapidly. By the time that Mark Hopkins stepped down after a very long tenure, 36 years, and he stayed on another 15 and screwed up a couple of successor presidents in the process. There were 9 fraternities here by the time Mark Hopkins stepped down in 1872. Well, the total enrollment in 1872 was 119, exactly the number that was here when he started in 1836. So, you know, with about half of the students in fraternities, the average membership was something like 7 or 8. There were not fraternity houses, there were fraternity rooms, and later on you get the houses. Now, jumping quickly to Franklin Carter, Chadbourne, there were no new fraternities, and Chadbourne was not in good health. And furthermore, Mark Hopkins was standing looking over his shoulder, which was not an advantage. And there was a big economic downturn, the Panic of 1873 and so forth. So the poor guy had hardly any initiatives that he could point to. Williams really picked up steam and energy under the presidency of Franklin Carter, 1881, 1901, 20 years. And that's when Williams began to attract big money. Mark Hopkins was not, he was a great educator, but he was not a good fundraiser. And it's a shame because, you know, he could have raised money like mad. He was a very popular lecturer, and but I'm getting off the trail. Now, Franklin Carter came from faculty at Yale. He knew how to ask for money, and he knew how to raise it. And perhaps the greatest philanthropist in the history of Williams was Frederick Ferris Thompson. If you want to know why so many of the buildings are named Thompson. And Thompson was from a banking family, and Citibank and J.P. Morgan Chase came out of that enterprise. And whenever Williams needed money, he would write a check. And Franklin Carter, in particular, knew how to make the ask. Now, during that time, you began to get, that period, 1881, 1901, the big fraternity houses where the expectation was your members live there and they dine there. Most of them live there. And that's when you get what J. Angevin later called the Taj Mahals, big, nice buildings. And that's when Williams came to be what Fred Rudolph loves to call the gentleman's college. It had been a simple Christian college, for country boys from the nearby farms. And as Nathaniel Hawthorne said in his diary after a brief visit to Williams, they're half bumpkins and half scholars. In coarse broadcloth suits, they want to show off their Latin and this sort of thing. But they're really just simple farm boys. And that was okay with Mark Hopkins because the aim of Williams was to produce Christians, and in particular to produce missionaries. And Williams did it in spades. In some classes, as many as 50% of the graduates went into the ministry, and a third was a very low batting average. You know, in a way, if you look at the history of Williams through the Hopkins era, and for his first century, really, the Christian theme was very pronounced. And the way the Hopkins brothers looked at the struggle at Williams, between the fraternities and the non-fraternity people, it was a struggle for the soul of Williams. So you have, on the one hand, the haystack legacy, that's where their focus was, and then the fraternity legacy. And the values were different. Mark Hopkins never liked fraternities, but he didn't dare make much of an issue because all of his trustees were big fraternity men. And they let the president know fraternities are untouchable, so he didn't make a lot of noise. Now, then we come down to Garfield, Harry Garfield, 1908 to 1934. Garfield was a patrician figure. He, of course, was very well known when he came to Williams from the faculty of Princeton, where he was a very close friend of Woodrow Wilson, the president of Princeton, who got kicked out of Princeton, but he landed on his feet, of course, as president of the United States just about 5 or 6 years later. By the way, Wilson got booted out of Princeton mainly because he had to do something. He tried to do something about the fraternity problem. Jack Sawyer could have given him some good advice about how to deal with the problem and survive. Garfield that was the golden age of fraternities, 1908 to 1934. He was troubled. He was a progressive politician. He was very much cut of the same political cloth as Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm sure he knew Roosevelt as well as his, of course, his good friend Wilson. And it troubled Garfield a great deal, even though he was a patrician figure, very comfortable with power and wealth and this sort of thing. He'd been a big corporate lawyer before he became a political scientist at Princeton. And he was troubled by the great divide between the haves, the fraternity men, and the have-nots, the non-affiliates. He formed the Commons Club, which later was named for him, the Garfield Club, to try to address that. And right at the beginning of his administration, Currier Hall across the street here was built, and he decided this is going to be the headquarters and the living quarters and the dining hall for the non-affiliates, the Commons Club members. I want them to have just as nice quarters as the fraternity members. Furthermore, he went on, I'm going to rule, which he did with the trustee approval, that fraternities may pledge only 75% members of a class. And that will mean that the Commons Club will have a good cross-section of the student body as well. Well, that reform turned out, ironically, to exacerbate the problem rather than solving the problem, because fraternity membership became more prized than ever. So that didn't work. Then he met another big problem later on, because Williams had a small but very impressive stream of black students. Most of them, just about all of them, as a matter of fact, in the early history, were from Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. These were the top students in the college. If you take almost any of them, they were Phi Bates. They were up here. And yet, not only did they not have a ghost of a chance of getting into a fraternity, they also were not voted into membership in the Commons Club. And a member of the class of 1929, Clint Knox, was so troubled by this that he went to see Garfield and said, look, why can't we be members of the Commons Club? Clint Knox was also from Dunbar High School. He had a superb academic record. He went on to Harvard to get his PhD and taught for a few years. Then he joined the State Department in the Corps of Diplomats, became a well-known ambassador to Norway, Haiti, a number of other places. According to Ferdy Toon, whom some of you probably knew, class of 1930, who knew Clint Knox very well, what Garfield said to the black students, including Knox, of course, was, you gentlemen should know that gentlemen don't go where they are not invited. And now, was he obeying his heart, or was he simply being making a prudent calculation in which he was saying, if I force these students under the Commons Club, then that will break the back of the Commons Club, and it will become unpopular and not accomplish the aims that I had for it. I'm almost sure it was the latter, but it was, I'm sure, a horrible dilemma for him. But he decided that was a battle he was not going to fight. Now, there was something else about Garfield. By the way, he was a great president. The curriculum that he designed for Williams, which was pretty much taken from Princeton, was a great curriculum, would have been for the whole country. He decided, since he had taught Latin at his old boarding school, St. Paul's, that Williams must have a 4-year Latin requirement for admission. Well, how can you meet that requirement? Well, you almost had to go to Exeter, St. Paul's, Hotchkiss, someplace like that. You sure were not going to get it from a regular high school. That meant that the students who could make it into Williams had to come from the prep schools. That generally meant they came from wealthier families. And so that, again, sort of undercut the purposes that he had in mind. Now, those are ironies that complicated things. Quickly now, to finish up my U2 thought. Tyler Dennett comes about in 1934, 3 tempestuous year, in 1937. I must say, Bruce mentioned that I probably learned some new things. Boy, I learned some new things when I got into the folders from Tyler Dennett. He made a speech, he gave a president's report in 1935, for the year 35-36, in which he said, Williams is a Christian college. And anybody who doesn't agree with Sunday Chapel doesn't belong here. And if you've discovered you made a mistake, you're welcome to leave any time. Now, some people, such as Fred Rudolph, who knew about this, and others, had more or less assumed that Williams stopped accepting Jews at that point. It's not true. I've verified over and over that stream of Jewish students, which was fairly substantial then, but a distinct minority, they continued coming. How in the world did a president dare when the newest and nicest dormitory was Lehman Hall, and when you had people like Maurice Ernst and so forth, that would have caused a real firestorm, I'm sure, and Dennett didn't decide to go there. He made the same point with regard to black students, saying this is not a proper place for them, and the black stream of admissions was cut off completely during his time, and against the great protest of these distinguished graduates. But let me rush on to Baxter, and this is where these guys come in with all of the tempest after World War II, when there was great agitation over fraternity issues, and then, of course, the revolution that occurred with Jack Sawyer, with a wonderful display of courage and resolution to bring us to where we are now.
Dee and Tony.
Well, I want to thank John for finally explaining to me why the one thing I truly hated about Williams, which was compulsory chapel. Now I know where it came from and how long it had been around. I found it deeply offensive. I want to tell any fellow members of the class of '57 that the men's room is downstairs. I say that for two reasons. It's useful intelligence. And secondly, when we came in the fall of 1953, we didn't even know that much. It was the ultimate tabula rasa. And for anyone here from '57, you will remember that because the late unlamented Baxter Hall wasn't finished when we arrived, we ate over in a World War II Navy annex in the back of Currier Hall, right across the street. It seemed fine. We didn't know anything else, but it was obviously temporary. But eating with us were the non-affiliates. Up until a few months before, it would have been called the Garfield Club. That may be the only thing I'm going to describe that is possibly the law of intended consequences. I think that the Garfield Club disbanding was, the significance of it was perhaps known to some of them and probably some members of the faculty, but it certainly was lost on us. The other thing that was lost on us that was totally new to Williams was what was called deferred rushing. Up to that point, freshmen had been rushed into fraternities just before classes started in September of their freshman year. Decision was made to try to promote something that we kept hearing about, never completely understood, called class unity. And so rushing into fraternities was deferred for an entire year. It would not take place until the beginning of our sophomore year. This, again, you know, it was like eating in the temporary room at Currier Hall. Okay, so that's what now? The rushing that occurred the following September was the beginning of a movement that was either called total rushing or total opportunity. In our 4 years, I guess it never quite got there, but the concept was, and it was talked about a bit, not very formally and not very widely, but it was talked about, that there was this mysterious goal out there that anyone who wanted to get into a fraternity ought to receive at least one bid from one fraternity so that everyone would have the opportunity to go into a fraternity. In our class, I think there were certainly under 10, maybe 7 or 8 people who did not receive an offer from a fraternity. And there was much cheering and self-congratulation that went on. The year after, the number was reduced again, and even more self-congratulation. What was ironic, and a number of us began to talk about this, was that the smaller that number got, the crueler it became. And it was very cruel. Williams, by the 50s, was a relatively, and all things are relative here, a relatively difficult school to get into, nothing like today. But getting in and surviving your freshman year, and then being told, guess what? You don't really fit, in a rather brutal way. And everybody knew about it, and that was it. By our senior year, in the fall of 1956, we were beginning to, some of us were beginning to coalesce, and I thank Dee for this because I had totally forgotten, but in the fall of 56, and that's the only date, we were not very good on dates, our group of bomb throwers. It just says fall 1956 on it. Very helpful. You can imagine how irritated the history department at Williams was with us when we kept putting things out with no dates on them, including the letter of the terrible 22, no date. 7 signed it saying, first line, we the undersigned favor the abolition of fraternities. And I guess this made it into the Williams record, didn't it, this letter? Or did we just show it to ourselves?
I don't know. It's long ago.
This is Dee Gardner here. It's a very short letter, and it's very blunt, and it says, in conclusion, I read you the opening line, the conclusion is, we are certain that fraternities are doomed at Williams, and that our plan, which will be described more fully later, will become a reality. The next spring, on or about the 1st of May, the 22 published an open letter with no date to the president and trustees of Williams College. It's a total of 7 pages long, and the 7th page is just our names. It was a serious document in the sense that when we met, we were concerned that this not be simply dismissible as a sort of political or pseudo-philosophic screed. We wanted to offer it as an extremely practical plan, one that actually could be taken seriously and didn't necessarily have to be reproduced exactly as we were proposing it, but which could not be dismissed as simply impractical. There's one other thing going on in those years that we were here, starting with deferred rushing, which I confess I was not only not aware of, it never even occurred to me until last June when 3 of the 4 of us presented a similar panel in this room, and that was the economic financial hit that the 15 fraternities were taking. They were being deprived of 1/4 of their revenue. That was not something, frankly, that we thought about. So it is an element of practicality that was missing, although I think we could have lawyered it pretty effectively if we had thought about it, because we did go into the impact of the fraternities coming off the town tax roll, for example. My assignment was to go down and get all those records, which we actually put in as a footnote, what the cost of every student's dues was that had to go to pay real property taxes. And we presented that as a savings. I didn't realize those records were public, and I was incredibly pleased with myself that I was able to get them, put them in our document, and a week after I graduated, I started a 16-year career in the Central Intelligence Agency, and I always thought, boy, that was really good training. And that was, we weren't even smoking anything. When our letter was presented, Finney Baxter, who was not, I think, renowned as a great fundraiser for Williams, but he did have an interesting reaction. Now remember, this is a little before his comment that he would arrive with 15 fraternities, he would leave with 15 fraternities. When he read our screed, his first reaction is reported to have been, "You've cost Williams College $1 million," which I guess in 1957 was serious money. It's probably a rounding error now in the endowment. We didn't feel that that was a particularly serious response any more than I'm sure the 15 fraternities when I leave was considered a serious or helpful response. You will hear from Dee and from Bruce that the impact of this letter was probably less than we hoped and less than we knew and less than until relatively recently we all believed. I think any one of the 22 would say we started the ball rolling with that letter in 1957. I think we put another place at the table. The table was not fully set with deferred rushing and the other things that I listed. This started it. I think it was a signal to members of the board who refused to accept it because it hadn't been asked for by them. But I think some of them must have thought about it and realized it was significant. I think some members of the faculty, and we did not consult with any members of the faculty while we were in the process. This was absolutely an internal movement, and it was not just seniors in the class of 57. There were some members of the class of 58 who signed it as well. But the seeds were there, and other things that I guess Bruce will talk about next, picked up from them.
Yeah, let me. I'm Dee Gardner, class of 57, and I was a classmate of Tony's, and I was much more aware of what was going on than Tony, because he was over there in the student union. But in our freshman year, we were all in the student union after our time with. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Thank you. When we moved to Baxter Hall, we had our first election of class officers in our freshman year, and there was a very political guy named Jamie Humes in our class, of the Humes family of several in the generation. Jamie didn't finish at Williams, but he ended up in the White House working for President Nixon and authoring several books. A very, very interesting guy. Jamie decided that he wanted to be my campaign manager for president of the freshman class. And we were going to run on the platform that the fraternities should take all of us or none of us. And we said, well, that's a great platform, I'm sure a lot of people will sign up for that. And of course, and I won the election. And there was a fellow from Deerfield, no slight, Bruce, who complained about the election. He said, college elections are not supposed to be about issues, they're supposed to be about popularity. So I don't know if I won or on popularity or on the issues.
The issues.
But that's right. But I was, so therefore, as a class president, I was on the college council, which was the student government, and I came across a third annual report of the college council, just to give you an idea about the importance of this issue and how we are dealing with it. There are 10 items on this report, things like the Purple Key and the Wreck and the Gull and Career Weekend and house parties and so forth and rallies, all about these things that we were dealing with. And then number 6 was rushing, and each year there was a new rushing committee report. The one for our year was headed up by Dick Repp, who later had a distinguished academic career at Oxford. And then number 7 was total opportunity. He said, it reads, the unwillingness of the fraternity to see the need for total opportunity is still evident. Its achievement would erase the biggest black mark on the Williams fraternity system and assure their survival longer in the face of increasingly sharp criticism. Gargoyle will recommend a program of enlightenment with a view to help create the favorable attitude necessary to its attainment. It was shown this last fall that the spirit of total opportunity is still insufficient to effect the pledging of the last few sophomores. The College Council will be expected to lead, inform, and guide campus opinion and action on this crucial issue. The next item was hazing. The next item was discrimination. And that led to the appointment of the committee that was headed up by Dave Phillips. Yeah, Dave Phillips, lawyer in San Francisco, wrote up and studied the whole issue of discrimination in the fraternities and came out with a report around the same time that our report that Tony described came out. For some reason, the trustees paid more attention to Dave Phillips' report than they did to our report, which they dismissed as unrealistic and unworkable and unsolicited. But the Dave Phillips report was well received, and they printed it in the Alumni Review in July of that year, and made very small mention of our proposal. But just to give you another little flavor of why we were feeling as we did, I got something in the mail, in an email from a classmate who was in the Delta Phi fraternity. And he said, in my senior year, we pledged 4 Jewish students, causing several of our members and some of the alumni great anxiety. The leadership of Delta Phi, headed by our president, Dwayne Yee, who was also a signer of our Terrible 22 report, were summoned to a meeting at the Williams Club in New York, where we were notified that a new slate of officers was being installed, and the chapter constitution was being rewritten. The New York Times got the story, and I suggest you go to their archives and retrieve the February 10th, May 19th, and July 7th, 1957 stories dealing with Williams, fraternities, and bias. That incident led to the establishment of the Committee on Discrimination and eventually to the end of the fraternity system at the college. But, Buzz Town, who's in the audience here, told me about Delta Phi had pledged Phi Delta. Get those Phi's mixed up, right? Phi Delta Theta, right?
Did you sever ties with the National over this?
Yeah, the year before we came, the fraternity pledged a Jewish kid, and the national fraternity put pressure on us, put pressure on the house. And when we all showed it, it was still a member, and he stayed there for Lauder. He went to the house. In the meantime, went into a local status quo, which it was until.
That was the work of Peter Connolly, class of 53, who was president of Phi Delta.
In 48, Phi Delta Theta had Instant Spencer as its president, and we did identically the same thing.
Yeah.
The national attorney looked over a biographical sketch of a man and said, "You're Jewish." And we said we want to support him, and we did, and we became mass alpha.
Yeah.
In 48. If possible, would you repeat that question?
Yeah. Well, the question was, I know the Phillips report identified 2 fraternities that were in violation of the national prohibition of, I think, Jews and blacks, and it was Phi Delta and Phi Gam.
He was Phi Delta.
Yeah.
2 different years.
Yeah, that's, but 48 was, that's sort of eye-catching for me. And Phi Gam, by the way, had Jewish members from the beginning, the local chapter. So they began as Alpha Zeta Alpha. You had people like Morris Ernst and Governor Lehman, I think, was brought in as an honorary member. So that was a part of their history. And in that case, the National just sort of pretended not to notice, and they did make an issue over admission of blacks. So.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up here because I'm going to have a chance to talk later about the implementation of the Angevine report and the trustee decision in the 1960s. Tony and I both went off to the Air Force and the CIA, and Williams College was a long ways away. But let me say that there's a fellow sitting in here, Bill Norris, who wrote me a letter in the Air Force, and he said, "Gee, Dee, you'd be very proud of us at St. Anthony." He said, "We took in one of these fellows who hadn't gotten an invitation to join the fraternity, and he was a Jewish fellow from Brooklyn, New York, and he had thick glasses, and no one was interested in him. So, but we got to know him after a while, and he was a pretty nice guy. I mean, he'd gotten into Williams, right? And he was a pretty nice guy. But we've helped him, you know. We've given him a little polish, I think. Well, this guy, you know, with this little assist from St. Anthony, went on to become a junior advisor, Phi Beta Kappa, Gargoyle, Rhodes Scholar, Williams trustee, distinguished lawyer, you know, internationally.
State Department.
Yeah, State Department. So, and President of the House? He was. And I told this story at a Gargoyle meeting, and he nodded and said, that's very true. But it was interesting. He also, at the time of the Angevine report, was not supportive of the Angevine report. So.
And who was this?
Who was this?
Matty Nimitz, wasn't it?
Matty Nimitz, yeah. Matt Nimitz, great guy, yeah. So I'll turn it to Bruce, who was dealing with, you know, the class of '63, I think it was. Bruce was the first class to actually achieve total opportunity, and I think Matt Nimitz was involved in developing plans because he was in the college council then when we were away. You were here. Great.
I arrived at Williams in the fall of 1958, and up until the time that the particular incident that drew my attention, there was no understanding of any of the history of the group called the Terrible 22. Was totally unaware that there had been any of the Phillips report, of the Sterling Committee report. We arrived here, obviously as freshmen. We didn't rush until sophomore year, and somewhat unaware of the fact that there was anything other than fraternities at Williams as far as social systems were concerned. My sophomore year, I pledged to the fraternity Alpha Delta Phi, which is now the Yellow House on Main Street here. It's called Perry House. And in January of my junior year, which would have been January 1961, I was elected president of the House. And about the third meeting, we were elected to serve the second semester of junior year and first semester of senior year. And I think that was the case throughout the fraternities. At that time, there were very few international students at Williams, and the ones that were here were placed, I guess by the administration and the cooperation of the fraternities, were placed in the fraternities under a category called social membership. At least that's what it was called at AD. Social membership meant that the individual could eat at the fraternity, could come to parties at the fraternity, but couldn't live there and couldn't participate in any of the house meetings and goat rooms and things like that. There was a young man whose family had escaped from North Korea and come eventually to this country by the name of Myung-Koo An, A-H-N. I think he had 2 other brothers that went to Williamston. And he was assigned to the AD house. And the houses back then, there were certain chores that were required anyway, or expected that the brothers would do, so that we didn't have to hire outside help and kick up the dues at the house, such as raking leaves in the fall or washing windows, or I can't remember what the other chores were. But as usual, about a half a dozen out of 40 or 50 brothers would show up to do these chores. But this fellow, An, would show up every single time and would work as hard as he could, because I think he liked being at the house and liked the social interaction with people there. So I think in the 3rd meeting in the spring of 1961, at the urging of a sophomore by the name of Bob Seidman, he said, well, why don't we make Charlie, and that's what he was referred to as Charlie. It was not his name. It was obviously a World War II carryover. Why don't we make Charlie a full member? That's a great idea, make Charlie a full member. I thought it was like falling off a log. So last item of business in the April meeting was to make Charlie a member, and it was put to a vote. And 3 people said, I like Charlie, but I couldn't live with him. And I didn't have the slightest idea what it meant. I thought that, Charlie would come up here and live. And it became clear that because he was Asian, these 3 people did not want him in the house. I was unaware of the fact that we had that's not a blackball, but it's a butter system. Blackball is one where one person can say, I don't want him, and that prevails. This was a butter system, and Charlie was out. And it so upset me. I mean, I guess I was just totally unprepared for that kind of discrimination. I was a JA at the time. I went back to the freshman quad to speak with some of the other JAs, and apparently it wasn't uncommon for these kinds of overt acts of discrimination to occur in the fraternities. As a result of the discussions that took place in the freshman quad, we decided that we should have a meeting and talk about whether this was appropriate and what, if anything, could be done about it. And so the first meeting was held in the chemistry. There's a lecture hall in the chemistry building over there. It was the first time I'd been in it. Sciences did me in. So the first meeting was really I think there were only about 15 of us, many of whom were JAs, and my guess is the rest were non-affiliates. And it was the first time, I think, that I had been in a meeting with a group of non-affiliates, because when you were in a fraternity, you didn't see or socialize with many other people other than the people in your fraternity. Well, we decided that we should explore this further, and we scheduled another meeting. And that meeting probably had about 45 or 50 people come, and there were some wonderful ideas, and people set about drafting the talk of a petition, started drafting a petition. Now word got out on the campus, and the third meeting was probably close to 100 people, and many of whom were there and were angry that there may be talk about abolishing fraternities, and the discussions were heated. As a result of that third meeting, this petition was prepared. I've read it over many times. This petition now is over 50 years old, and it is extremely well written, and it's somewhat political in nature, in that it doesn't talk about the abolition of fraternities. It talks about the responsibility of the college to assume feeding and the housing of all students, which meant the abolition of fraternities, but didn't say it outright. We were all fired up and very enthusiastic about our mission. And when I look back and think about what this triggered, and how many people were either bold enough or stupid enough to step forward and sign this petition, we had about 1,200 students at Williams at the time. There are 46 kids who signed this petition, many of whom were the non-affiliates. But when I think back about it, there were enough students in here who were considered the, quote, the responsible kids, the ones who were editor of the record or presidents of their houses and occupied these positions of responsibility at Williams. It may have played a bit of a part in whether or not Jack Sawyer decided to take this and do something with it. As I said earlier, this petition was given to Finney Baxter in the waning months of his tenure at Williams, and he was quick to return it with the comment that I alluded to earlier. Now, when we left in the end of May in 1961, I think most of us felt, look, good try. A lot of good ideas came out of this, and whether or not anybody was going to pick this up and do anything with it when we returned in September, I don't know. But I don't think there was a lot of enthusiasm based on Finney's response and based upon the fact that at least the students knew nothing about Jack Sawyer. He was a trustee. I think I found that out later, but nobody knew anything about him. And how much did you know about the president when you were a student anyway? So,
Except for John.
Yeah, except for John, right? Excuse me, John. You're a religion professor, John. So I was literally shocked when on July 15th of 1961, I got a call from Kay O'Connell, was that his secretary? Kay O'Connell, who was the president's secretary, asking if I'd like to come up to Williamstown and talk to the president about this petition. And by the way, I was reading this thing over again. I forget a little bit of it about in 50 years. There was a request in this petition for the college to appoint a committee consisting of trustees, of students, and alums to investigate the fraternity system with a recommendation of what the outcome should be. And I arrived up here on that July day and sat with President Sawyer, and he teased out what I thought were the issues here, and then he informed me. Now, this is 15 days into his presidency. 15 days. I mean, it's remarkable. He had appointed the Angevine Committee, most of whom were pre-World War II alums at Williams. I think Freddie Nathan was the only non-affiliate on that committee. There was one voting member, Professor Bill Gates, and Hodge Marcraft, who was a professor of chemistry, was the recording secretary of that group. And there were two undergraduates on the committee, a fellow by the name of Rob Durham, who was in the Kaisai House, and I. There were no non-affiliates undergraduates on the committee. And so I left Williamstown feeling pretty good until I took out my alumni directory and started looking at who these people were. I'd never heard of any of them. And they're all fraternity members and all what I thought was pretty old. They were pre-World War II people. Dick Debevoise, I think, was the only post-World War II.
46.
46. That was pretty old, too. So I then got depressed again, thinking, uh-oh, I said, this is going to be a whitewash. And heard nothing about that until we came back to school, and then things moved fairly quickly because Jay Angevine wanted to give people an opportunity to be heard in this investigation of the social system here at Williams. We had a meeting here in Williamstown, which was, it was heated at times. Alums were invited, area alums. Some people came up from New York. And then we had a second meeting that was held in New York, and that was a pretty hot meeting. There were some people who came from other parts of the country who let it be known in no uncertain terms that the fraternity system should be preserved at all costs, because the fraternity system was Williams. That was the Williams experience. We all came back to Williams. There was the mid-semester break, and the second semester, the Angevine committee members broke up in pairs and went to visit other schools, other colleges, and universities to see what the social systems were like there. Everybody reporting back to Angevine, who would summarize these reports, and for those who didn't get a chance to go. And we came together again in May of my senior year in 1962 and met in Hopkins Hall and made small talk and talked about how things were going and what we thought of some of the reports and so on, and then sat down, and it was literally almost this quick that Jay Angevine says, well, I think we have consensus here, don't we? And I said to myself, consensus? I must have missed 3 meetings. I don't think we've debated much about what was going on, and people were nodding that they thought we had consensus, and he summed up what he thought the consensus was, that, after this investigation, that it was clear that we thought Williams should be moving in a different direction and assuming the responsibility of housing and feeding its students while preserving all the qualities of small social units and so on. And it was, for me, it was just, it was almost shocking at how we arrived at consensus. Now, they may have been talking, all those alums may have been talking and excluding the undergraduates because we were here on campus. I don't know that. I mean, obviously, I don't know that. But there the Angevine report was. I have a copy of the Angevine report. That was submitted to the trustees at their June meeting in 1962. At that meeting, the trustees adopted the Angevine Committee report. And so in literally less than 1 year of Jack's tenure, fraternities were effectively abolished at Williams. An institution that started here in 1833 was gone in about 11 months. I think that was the genius of Jack Sawyer. I think that how he went to certain people in the alumni body, the people that he chose to be on this committee, and the respect that all of those people had with their classmates was part of this. There's a course on campus now called Studies in Leadership Studies or something, and they study all these wonderful case studies of great leadership with the people at GE, or wonderful world studies about leadership. But they also study the case of Jack Sawyer and how he dealt with the fraternity issues here because of how incredible this accomplishment was. So that's my story. I've as recently as a couple of weeks ago sent an email to John Chandler, who was present all during this period, and said to him, the more I think about this, the more I think that Jack arrived on campus with a plan to torpedo fraternities. It couldn't possibly happen in 11 months. And you scratch your head and say, it doesn't seem as though this could happen. One of the things that helps make it happen, and it's true no matter what the issues are, students are transient. They're here 4 years and gone. And so Dee Gardner comes back, he implements a new program, and as soon as the students are gone, the ones who were here in fraternities, which was no more than 4 years, it might have been a 3-year turnaround, wasn't it? Nobody here knows what a fraternity is like at Williams. And so as far as what goes on campus, that's clear sailing. It's gone. Then what to do about it and how to implement a new system presents other issues. And then, of course, right after this, right after Dee did his work, comes coeducation here. So I think it's a fascinating story. And I think that Dee should follow up with what happened here with the students who were sort of phased through the fraternity system, and then those who were put into an entirely new social system here.
Thanks, Bruce. I got a call from Jack Sawyer in the summer of 1962 and went over to Woods Hole to meet with him and Ann and with my wife. And he indicated that the committee that had been set up called the Standing Committee, headed by Talcott Banks, class of 28, a Boston lawyer, needed some staff support and wondered whether I'd like to come back to Williams and do that. Well, I was going into my second year of graduate school at Yale and working on my PhD, and I said, gee, I don't know if I'd ever get back and do that PhD, but this was kind of a unique opportunity to help implement something that we as brash undergraduates had proposed, 5 years before that. So I said goodbye PhD and hello Alpha Delta Phi and Delta Psi and the Greek world, and came back as staff assistant and then secretary of the Standing Committee. And on that committee, Bruce indicated that the fraternities were gone after 11 months under his watch of the Andrew report. We thought we had a few more years to actually implement it and to make it happen. And the committee had Charlie Fail on it, who was just a rock, and Dick Debevoise, who was on the Angevine Committee, Fred Rudolph, of course, the great historical perspective, and Whitney Stoddard, who had the sense of the campus and buildings and so forth, Hodge Marcraft, and myself, and then other people helped out along the way, like Joe Kershaw, who was the new provost, and Ben Labrie came in to replace Triple R Brooks as dean of the college, and John Hyde, who became dean of freshmen. So they were all involved helping out. We met, seemed to be every weekend. It was probably not quite that often, but from Friday on to Sunday afternoon. And we didn't think the job was totally done yet. We had to do planning for how we're going to do this. We had to negotiate with the fraternities. We had to answer alumni concerns and develop education about the changes already in the fraternity system. That's something that Fred Rudolph has kind of pointed out, that the fraternities had kind of changed already, and it was students who changed them. Jack Sawyer used to describe them as drinking and driving clubs, which, and he described how many cars were gone on the weekend, and that the people weren't standing around singing hymns as they did in the 1920s. So there was a big educational role, and Jack, was out there with alumni groups all over across the country and working awfully hard at that. Ted Banks did. I was down in Washington and getting shot at by some of the alumni around there about this change. But my main role was working with the students. And I think one of the great things we did was to enlist the ideas and creativity and the enthusiasm of students. And they weren't just the ones that, had favored this change, but some that were really out of the fraternity system. And we had 5 student committees, which I worked with, one on physical facilities, and we set up a mock bedroom in the gym with Ben Thompson, the architect we hired to do the Greylock Corner buildings. And we had other students who were thinking about how they should be governed, taking the best of the fraternity system and adding some things, social, cultural things, faculty involvement, and so forth. A lot of, very educational ideas that came out of this time, because this was an educational change as well as a social change. And I think that was really good. And then Bruce mentioned the turnover of students. We set a timetable so that the class of '66, which were freshmen at that time, would be allowed to rush the following fall into fraternities as they were. But the class of '67, who were not in Williams yet, were advised that Williams would not be a fraternity college, and if you really wanted that experience, you should go somewhere else. So the '67 were alerted to that, and that's what we did. We allowed '66 to go through college pretty much as Bruce had in terms of fraternity experience, even though at that time we were also transitioning from the fraternity to the residential houses. And one of the things we invited the fraternities to do was to sponsor the residential houses. So Alpha Delta Phi became Perry House, and Chi Psi became Spencer House, and Zeta Psi became Wood House, and so on and so forth. And a couple of fraternities didn't want any non-fraternity members to be in their house, like my fraternity, which was St. Anthony. They said they didn't want any unwashed Williams students in our fraternity house, but they were willing to have the Center for Development Economics come up there, so we put them there, and that's worked out very well. Phi Delta Theta has the language lab, and so they shifted over to we had 4 units in the Greylock Corner when that was built in '64, '65. And so some of the houses moved in there. There's a lot to it, and I'm probably running out of time, and I'd like to get John back into the picture and talk about some of the other issues. One of the ones that John, I know, has been interested in is the issue of the continuing fraternities. As Bruce said, the Angevine report did not say that fraternities would be abolished. There was an opening there that we call them purely fraternal groups could continue under the new arrangements. And that was thought they'd go back to their earlier mode of having just a room in a building or a house like that. And they could have a meeting, but no social activities, no living, no dining, and so forth. And some people thought, well, that might work for some fraternities. And again, my fraternity was interested in that. I think Alpha Delta was for a while, and maybe Theta Delta, I don't know. But anyways, after a pretty short period of time, we realized that that wouldn't really be a great thing for Williams either, to have just a very small group in these exclusive clubs. So we advised the president and the trustees that we thought Williams would be better in the long run without even these little fraternal groups. And as you may know, and John may speak of it, some of them went underground and or over the border in Powell, Vermont, Theta Delta Chi in particular, and my fraternity again in particular, had little barns up there and they had little meetings. And I had a son in the class of '04, and he called me up one day. He said, Dad, he said, the headline in the Williams Record said that there's a fraternity, an illegal fraternity up in Vermont, and Dad, I think it's your fraternity. And I tried to find out about this through the fraternity website, and I went in and they said, you got to put your name in and your class that you were in to get access to the website. So I did that, and I got a tilt coming back. I said, your records have been expunged. as you have been excommunicated from the fraternity. So I wrote back, I said, well, gee, what's this all about? You know, and I said, is Jack Shaw still head of the fraternity? And I got an email back from Jack Shaw, and he said, you know damn well why you're not allowed to get into it. So I get kicked out, I guess, and which just, you know, bothers me a lot because they never told me.
John.
Well, you know, when I succeeded Jack Sawyer in 1973, I was pretty well braced to be challenged, you know, try the new boy, maybe we can roll back. And there were a number of visits from lawyers representing the fraternities, and these were Williams-connected people. In fact, some of them were my former students, but I could tell they were playing hardball. So I got the trustees to pass a new resolution and the faculty, and of course that was, that was very easy to get. To signal that these are very firm. There will be no rollback, no reconsideration. And then there were the houses up on Barber Pond Road in Pownell. I knew where they were. The truth of the matter is that they really didn't catch on with the students, even though there was free beer and so forth. In fact, just the other day, I was talking with a member of the class in 1980, and he was laughing. He said, somebody wanted to take me up to Pownell. It was very secretive. He said, I went up there, and he said, I discovered they were inducting me into a fraternity, and he said, I was sort of trapped. And he said, so I want to confess I was a fraternity member apparently for about 2 hours. He said, I didn't dare go back. One of the houses burned down, by the way. I was in my office working that evening, so I have an alibi. I wasn't there. And the other house was taken over by the town of Pownell and sold for failure to pay taxes. But I do think that the students were really not interested, even though free beer enticed a few people up occasionally, and also the alumni, even those who had questions about the decision, had decided, well, the college has demonstrated that it knew what it was doing. It was a responsible decision, so there was really no support. Could I jump in on one more theme? There were a lot of good things about fraternities, and even though the decision to abolish them was a great thing. I've been pondering recently, as I've talked with more alumni, about what were some things that we lost. Well, we lost a kind of, in the fraternities, looking out for one another. Carl Vogt said, I got my early training as a lawyer by being president of Phi Gam, and he said by keeping some of my fraternity mates out of jail, I think some of them stole a fire truck, and the police took interest in this, and Carl talked them into not pursuing this, and also Fred Rudolph. I was talking with him recently about this. He said, look at what Williams had by way of support of student services back then. There was a security force of one person who I think was called the night watchman. His chief duty was to make sure there are no women in the dorms after 6 p.m., and that was about it. Practically no psychotherapy. I think Bill Cole gave a lot of sex talks and so forth, counseling. And Fred raised the question. He said, a big reason for that was the fraternities took care of these issues. If brothers got in trouble, needed a little counsel about making an ass out of yourself occasionally, sit down, have a frank talk. those were good things. And I must say, as I look at Williams today and all of the support services for students, Professor Berger here may want to jump in on this. I think, are we in a way doing almost too much? Should we depend more on students to do more for themselves? Isn't that an aspect of education that would be valuable for the long term? So,
John, I'd like to just address that for a second. You know, we promised in the Angevine report and the standing committee reports and Jack Sawyer's talks to alumni and students that we were trying to preserve the best features of the fraternity system without the selection, the hazing, the rushing, the discrimination. And we set up a lot of things. We had the student government in the residential houses. We had some faculty associates that were always assigned, and more of them, and the good things going. We had alumni councils for them. We had the dining rooms, the small group dining, living still, and I left in 1969, and someone said, "Well, it's good you're leaving because you just have to defend what you've built here all the time, you know." And I thought that the next year, the alumni office said, "We're not going to have these alumni councils anymore because that was done in the dean's office with students, you know." And they wanted the control of it, you know, understandably. John English said, "You know, I just don't want that." So they were gone. Pretty soon, the faculty associates or the apartments and some of them were gone because they needed it more for students, I mean, for visiting people and that sort of thing. So some of the ideas, the intramurals and so forth, and part of it was student, you know, initiative over the years who thought it was more important to see what room you're going to be in and what students you're going to live with rather than what community you're belonging to. So I think the community aspects of and that looking out for each other and managing your own affairs, it was definitely a loss, and I think a lot of people agree that.
Can I add just something to that too? I think that is a theme that ran through the terrible 22 letter, was that we wanted to preserve the positive side of small unit living and eating. And one of the key elements in our proposal, again, going back to trying to be practical, but also idealistic, in effect, we threw down the gauntlet to the fraternities and said, if you believe in Williams, this is not the language of the letter, this is mine interpretation. If you believe in Williams and are really committed to it, your last great manifestation of that commitment will be to donate your physical plant to the college. That was dismissed as totally idealistic. Yeah. But after the Angevin report, the first fraternity to donate its physical plant to Williams was Finney Baxter's Kappa Alpha House, which sadly burned down very shortly thereafter. Finney was not in town.
I'm going to exercise my prerogative and say we're done. We're happy to have questions from anybody here, but we've been sitting for an hour and a half almost, so stay around, ask questions. Thank you all for coming.